you started some stuff on Twitter, which I like. It was wonderful. And it revealed a lot of, they called it fictional journalism. I'm going to call it lazy agenting or reading comprehension skills. Anyway, you did a report about someone else's report. The agent tried to dunk on you. Can you just tell the good people that watch the show what happened? Like, let's just pretend this was a game and you're at your post-game press conference.
Yeah.
Chase Senior, what happened out there today?
First of all, Grant, great to join you. It's been a long time coming. A lot of people have been on my show saying you got to link up with Grant Cohn. So a lot of people are talking on the internet streets that this is the duo that the people have wanted to see. But
True.
For real, you've been a Niners content creator OG for a long time. Had an opportunity to briefly meet you and talk with you in Las Vegas for the Super Bowl. So it's good to finally
And we said we would do this. So I'm glad that we're doing it. And it really took, sometimes I get caught up in like the day-to-day, but it really took Brandon Aiyuk's agent trying to dunk on you for me to be like, oh yeah, let's definitely get Chase on the show. So Chase, you're just doing your job.
Yeah.
You're just there doing your job, and Brandon Aiyuk's agent comes at you. It's like the 50 Cent meme, like, me? Yeah.
So what happened was there was the report yesterday from All Steelers, which is a publication that covers the Pittsburgh Steelers, that the Steelers
I'm all 49ers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were aggressively pursuing a Brandon Aiyuk trade, and they would be very surprised if they did not land Brandon Aiyuk. So I saw that, and all throughout this offseason, there's been a couple of teams who have been sprinkled into the Brandon Aiyuk trade rumor discussion, but the Pittsburgh Steelers are really the organization that's been talked about a lot as the team that's really looking at Brandon Aiyuk, because their general manager, Omar Khan, is desperately trying to upgrade the wide receiver position. When I was at the NFL Combine, I was talking with a lot of people around the league, and they said, offensive line, wide receiver, don't think they're going to make a big splash at quarterback. They brought in Russell Wilson. The trade value diminished on Justin Fields, so they decided to bring in two quarterbacks, but they're hot and heavy on these wide receivers. And Omar Khan wants to get that legit wideout next to George Pickens to really get that offense in motion, because they've had this inept offensive coordinator over the last couple of years in Matt Canada. They're trying to figure out the quarterback spot. The defense is really good. And Mike Tomlin has not had a losing season in 17 years with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But since Big Ben's arm became cooked, they've been a bad, mundane offensive unit for a long time. And so you pair all of that up with all of the reporting and all of the speculation. It's been Pittsburgh mentioned so much as one of the marquee trade suitors for Aiyuk. So I see this report, and all I did was sit in this chair and I referenced the report. I credited who had the report in the video. On my tweet, I said, according to reports, not according to me. And I shared my opinions on what that report said. And I said, look, the starting point for a Brandon Aiyuk trade, and I've said this all along, is a first-round pick. And Steelers fans are diminishing the talent level of Aiyuk, in my opinion. And it's ridiculous that they're throwing out these trades of a third-round pick for Aiyuk. They don't think he's a number one. And I'm like, well, hold on. He's a 26-year-old who's an ascending player who I still think is scratching the surface of what he can become. He's an all-around wide receiver, the best wideout on the Niners roster, by the way. Great footwork, route running. He had a great connection with Brock Purdy as one of the best vertical wide receivers in the NFL. And he put up statistically a fantastic season in a run-centric offense with all of these other weapons. And he was an all-pro this year, and he was the 25th overall pick in 2020. So to me, the asking price is a first-round pick. So I kind of shared the opinion of, if the Niners want to get rid of Aiyuk, or if he wants out, or the asking price is too high, Pittsburgh could be a destination because they have the 20th pick. And what that allows the Niners to do is to draft a wide receiver, get an offensive lineman, and find your Aiyuk replacement.
Hold on, let me jump in for a second.
Need, and then
Hold on, before we let me just jump in for a second. I want to take it back to the agent, because before we get into what the Niners should do, it just kills me what happened between you and the agent. It's like, if the agent wanted to say that the original report was bogus, he could have found it on Twitter and said so.
Yeah.
But he said that your
commentary and opinion
report was bogus. So now I just don't know what to. He could have said, Aiyuk's not getting traded. But he didn't say that. He said a report about a report is bogus. He could have said, hey, Brandon, why don't you follow the Niners on Instagram again so we can stop all this speculation? But he didn't do that. So let's go back and read the original report, which he didn't refute, because there's a lot in there that you referenced quickly. I referenced quickly. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from, even though the guy took a shot at you.
For sure.
So let's read it together. It's short. Steelers are looking to add a veteran wide receiver via trade before the 2024 season. Their sights appear set on Brandon Aiyuk, which has fans wondering what would a deal cost? Not as much as fans would think. According to a team source, the Steelers and Niners trade talks are real. While nothing is imminent, they would, quote, be surprised if it didn't happen, end quote. But it all comes down to compensation, and Pittsburgh isn't willing to budge much on price. With Aiyuk making it publicly known on social media that negotiations aren't going well with he and the Niners, it appears any team like the Steelers have some advantage in these trade talks. Pittsburgh isn't willing to overpay for a player who isn't going to be around long-term with their current team. What should the expectation be? Just guessing, it feels like a second-round pick and maybe a late-round pick could get the deal done. Then there's the matter of his contract. While the Steelers don't need to extend him this offseason or ever, they probably will. He's looking at roughly $30 million per season after 2024. That'll be handled by the Steelers front office. What they're worried about when it comes to a trade is the Niners taking on some of Aiyuk's $14 million contract this season. This is a very specific report citing a team source.
Very specific.
What they're worried about when it comes to a trade is the Niners taking on some of Aiyuk's $14 million contract this season, a negotiation that will likely end with Pittsburgh paying less for the star wideout than his salary is worth for his first season with the team. No one knows when a deal will get done, but the two sides are in contact. It could come down to the wire in the NFL draft, or it can go on afterward. But until Aiyuk signs his name on a new deal in San Francisco, the possibility that he ends up with the Steelers is very real. That's an extremely specific report with all kind of information that's clearly at least coming from the Steelers or lying about coming from the Steelers. I know Noah. We work at the same place. He is a legit journalist, and I know he's connected with that organization. I know he could just make a phone call. So, Mr. Agent, what did you think of that?
Yeah.
It explains why they think they can get him for a second-round pick. I think the thought process is this. Aiyuk doesn't want to be there anymore. So the Niners have a choice. They could trade him for whatever they could get for him now or let him walk next year and get the comp pick. What do you want to do? And from the Steelers' perspective, they could just wait a year and sign him. So why should they trade their first-round pick now when they could just wait a freak? It's not like Tom was getting fired, right? Yeah. They're patient over there in Pittsburgh. All right, I just talked for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, and look, in this era of fake news journalism, when people are clickbait chasing and they want to get views because that's how things do well, that's how things take off, that's how people make names for themselves, I can see why Brandon Aiyuk's agent wants to control the narrative. But here's the thing. That is extremely detailed, as you mentioned, to just make it all up. And my issue with this is we're going to take nowadays everything that agents say as 100% truth and gospel. Do people understand that sports agents sometimes can get really, really slimy? And then from my standpoint, I don't really consider myself a journalist. I used to work in news as a news reporter on TV. There's a reason I don't do that any longer, because I don't want to do that. I've always wanted to be a talk show host. I've wanted to do this since I was 5 years old. I want to share opinions. I want to share my analysis. That's what I was doing with that video. And people take it as if I'm trying to report the news. No, I'm referencing a report out there that is extremely detailed. And why didn't Brandon Aiyuk's agent decide to quote tweet that report from that person? And I'll also say this. The job of a sports agent is to get their client paid. They always want to control the narrative. And some people will fire back saying, this makes no sense. Him controlling this narrative, it's not any leverage for Brandon Aiyuk to get paid. He wants to control the story. He wants other teams to still be a suitor for Brandon Aiyuk to drive the price tag up as far as a trade goes, or as far as the Niners' potential contract extension for Brandon Aiyuk. And then lastly, before I throw it back to you, Grant, this is what I reported in March, is that Ryan Williams of Athletes First is best friends with John Lynch. And John Lynch was the best man at his wedding.
Yeah, good
and they
enough.
want to get a deal done.
They're
but
working
they have
together.
this level of relationship here where I imagine Ryan Williams is also sticking up for John Lynch and the Niners as well by refuting some of these reports.
Right, because when an agent takes things public, it's like he's trying to work against the general manager he's trying to negotiate with. Like he's exhausted all options, and they're not going to have that kind of relationship. They're very close friends. What I think is interesting about this report too is they mentioned that the Steelers don't want to pay all of Aiyuk's salary this year, so it's a complex negotiation. And the way I interpret it, they say they are in contact and they can't tamper, but they're talking about a potential trade, and the Steelers would say, "All right, you want that first round pick? You want that first round pick?
Yep.
Oh, well, we don't want to pay this salary." So let's start there. I mean, they're not just going to give away the first round pick. Okay, well, how about if you pay 10 million of the 14 million salary? How about that? How much do you want to be in the top 20? And tell your fans that you won the trade. It's just money, right? Like that's the kind of conversation I think they're having over the next week. And I think that's why I think it's kind of silly for the agent to go on social media and try to set it down. Like what, you teams aren't talking to the Niners about trading for Brandon Aiyuk. Like he's not displeased. He didn't unfollow the Niners. Like we all know what's going on. And if you want to like quibble with one person's little Chase Senior's interpretation of someone else's report, like that doesn't do anything for me.
No. And you don't want fake news to spread, right? But are you just shutting down Noah's report and the work that he may have done where he's talking to Pittsburgh Steelers team sources? Ryan Williams, you might not know the team sources that Noah is talking to. So again, we're taking this as if, oh, you have to trust the agent. You have to trust the agent. The agent doesn't care about some of this other stuff. What they care about is getting their client paid. Why? Commission. They get paid once that athlete signs that contract.
And again, what did Noah write in this? He said basically the Steelers feel pretty confident that they're going to get Brandon Aiyuk. They also feel it's not going to take a lot of draft capital to get him, and that it could drag on for a while. It could happen in the offseason. It could happen during the season. They don't really seem pressed. And again, the idea is if you don't trade for him this year, you could just freaking sign him next year and he'll be 27 at that point. So patience is a virtue in this case.
And is it a bad thing that Aiyuk has ascended every year that he's been in the NFL? He was a JUCO guy who then went to Arizona State. So he had to really work his ass off to go from JUCO to Arizona State. Then every year he's been in the NFL, all four of them, his receiving yards have gone up, 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 up to the point where he's looked at now as a complete wide receiver who had great production this past year as a focal point of the offense, unseated Deebo Samuel as the number one wideout, the number one target for Brock Purdy. He was a second-team All-Pro, and these teams are interested in Aiyuk because he's a really good player. So why do you feel the need to take to social media to shut down these reports when they're talking about positivity with your client because he's sought after for how good of a player he is?
Okay, I thank you for taking the conversation here. Why did he do it? Okay, let's try to put the pieces together before we move on. Well, we know he's not just friends with John Lynch, but very close friends. And what would John Lynch want? What is in John Lynch's interest if during this time, they don't really know what's going to happen with Aiyuk. They might trade him, they might not. Lynch likes moving in secrecy. He didn't want anyone to know what quarterback they were going to take in 2021, even though it didn't really freaking matter. Like it had to be a mystery. Everything has to be a mystery. So if they're going to trade Brandon Aiyuk, I think he would prefer Aiyuk's agent to make it seem like it's not going to happen. Because who knows? I mean, maybe the Niners want to draft a wide receiver in round one. And if everyone knows they're in the wide receiver market, it'd be harder for them. Yep. Whatever reason. I think clearly Lynch wants this to be private. And Ryan, the agent, is ensuring that it is, or trying to batten down the hatches and keep the leaks from spreading. But it's like, talk to the Steelers.
Yeah. Also, John Lynch, Ryan Williams, Brandon Aiyuk was the one who tweeted directly at Mike Tomlin. He tweeted directly at Mike Tomlin, which only leads to speculation, Ryan Williams, from your client about him maybe wanting to play there, with all of the other reports from Noah, from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, that they want a wide receiver and they have the draft capital in order to trade.
Like anyone who has a source in Pittsburgh is saying like, yeah, Pittsburgh, they're talking like they think they're in on this. I mean, maybe the Niners don't want to trade him, but it seems like the rest of the league is kind of just circling around like buzzards, like, yeah, but you're going to have to, aren't you? And it's going to be for less than you'd like, huh? Because you kind of pissed off Ayuk a few years ago. That's too bad. And you don't really pass enough. And you already paid Debo, huh? And you got to pay Brock Purdy. You're in a tough spot. Hey, we'll take him off your hands for a second round pick.
They're in a tough spot too.
Yeah, you're in a tough spot. Hey, but we'll give you a second round pick. It'd be nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
the other thing that I think too, you just look at the timeline right now, right? And I think there's a little bit of pressure on both sides here because Calvin Ridley gets that deal of $23+ million. That reset the wide receiver market. Then Devontae Smith signed his deal, $25 million. That reset the market again. So if the Niners got out in front of this, I thought that Aiyuk all along was going to get more than Debo because he's the better wide receiver than Debo. And that starting point was probably going to be at about $24, $25 million. But now Aiyuk's better than Devontae Smith, in my opinion. So now the asking price is 25.5, 26, maybe 27. And that coupled with this is a very, very deep wide receiver class where if you want an X boundary perimeter wide receiver, there are those prototypes. If you want a slot wide receiver, there are a lot of those in the draft class as well. And with the draft coming up, the Niners are trying to figure out their plan. If Brandon Aiyuk wants $30 million per year, let's say, and the Niners don't want to give him that deal, they probably have to find a way to trade him away, which is why the team and the agent are trying to control the narrative right now because they want the leverage before the draft.
Correct.
Because then if the Niners trade him away before the draft, that's when they get his replacement who's going to come at a fraction of the price.
Yes. Yes. So this is all about the agent and the 49ers maintaining maximum trade value and market value for Brandon Aiyuk to get him the most money possible on his next deal and to get the Niners the most draft capital possible in the trade, if that's what it comes to, which I think it is. Real quick before we move on, best guess, does he get traded?
I think he comes back to the Niners. I just think this is a classic San Francisco organizational strong arm tactic where the front office in Prague, they're playing hardball right now. You look at the history of when the Niners have taken care of their homegrown players. It's literally happened in 4 consecutive off seasons. George Kittle, Fred Warner, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa. I think they find a way to get a deal done with Aiyuk, and it's going to check in now that the price tag has gone up $26, $27 million per year, which in turn, I think next offseason forces them to have to get rid of a marquee veteran, whether it be Deebo, Juszczyk, or George Kittle.
Well, Juszczyk for sure. Okay,
because
moving on.
They're going to have to pay Brock Purdy as well.
That's true.